Once upon a time, in the heart of a very big city, where people paraded themselves in luxury cars to prove to the world that they were wealthy, a woman who was by far one of the richest women in the country lived her life without a car, whilst people of her caliber drove around in expensive cars and convoys. She walked, defiling all preconceived notion that wealth must be won, driven or announced. Her name was Anwuli Okafor, a multi-billionaire who never used a car. Anwuli was one of the richest women in the country, the owner of over 100 buildings, as well as several oil blocks and a global empire. Anwuli Okafor never liked the attention that came with being wealthy. She was a simple woman who saw no difference between the rich and the poor. She walked on the streets every day, dressed in normal clothes that didn't give up the fact that she was rich. She had so many friends on the street, hawkers, market women, and even beggars who always prayed for her when she dropped some money in their bowls. And Willie loved the life that she was living, but not everyone viewed what she did as being practical. They called her foolish and stingy, knowing that she could afford any car of her choice but still chose to walk. Even her subordinates drove flashy cars, whilst Anwuli walked on the streets like a commoner. Many people whispered behind her back. Some mocked her, whilst others feared her greatly. Rumors even began to spread that Anwuli was mentally unstable, that she sold her soul to the devil for wealth and could no longer sit inside the car. Some even claimed that she was cursed and that if she ever dared to enter any vehicle, tragedy would strike. When she was kidnapped a few years ago, rumors had it that the kidnappers all died mysteriously, and everyone attributed it to Anwuli, who returned home on foot the next day. That incident became a tale of wonder across the city. People said the kidnappers had tried to put her in a van, but it wouldn't start. When they eventually succeeded, the kidnappers all killed themselves, leaving Anwuli untouched. After that incident, no one dared to touch her, and even the boldest criminals crossed the road when they saw her coming. Yet, Anwuli never confirmed or denied the stories. She continued to walk, smiling as she walked through the crowded streets of Lagos, greeting people by name and buying street food from roadside vendors. Under rain and sun, she walked as people mocked and laughed at her. One morning, a young journalist whose name was Chioma approached Anwuli outside a mechanic workshop where the billionaire was chatting with a roadside painter. Madam Anwuli, she said breathless, may I ask you one question? Why don't you ever use a car? Anwuli looked at her and smiled. She turned to the painter and promised to visit again as she began to walk away, ignoring Chioma completely. Chioma, not one to be easily dismissed, quickly followed her. Please ma, I'm not here to mock you. I truly want to understand. Anwuli stopped and turned slightly as she studied the young woman Chioma, who was panting from the short chase. A notepad clutched tightly in her hand as her press tag swung from her neck. You want to understand? Anwuli asked calmly, her voice low and steady. Then leave me alone and stop following me, she said to Chioma, who watched her cross the road. Eager to get a word from Anwuli, Chioma tried to cross the road to meet with her when she got hit by a motorcycle. Her notepad flew from her hand as pages fluttered into the air like desperate birds. She hit the ground with a hard crack as her head bounced against the pavement. Everybody screamed in terror as Chioma was rushed to the nearby hospital. She sustained a few injuries and everyone attributed the accident to Anwuli. I told you she's cursed, they all murmured underneath their breaths as the fear they had for her increased. However, Anwuli was not deterred. She paid all of Chioma's hospital bills and paid her a visit every day at the hospital until she was discharged. People blamed her for the accident, but Anwuli did not care as she continued to walk. Months later, she decided to leave her mansion to take her usual walk down to the office. It was a 1 hour walk, and the sun was now blazing hot. Madam Anwuli took her time as she walked. She came across a young child who was too terrified to cross the road. Remembering what happened to Chioma a few months ago, Madam Anwuli decided to help the young girl cross the road. She held her hands gently smiled down at her, and together they began to cross the road. The traffic light was red, and all the cars had stopped, but just as they reached the middle of the road, a wine-colored Mercedes suddenly swerved out of nowhere and screeched next to them as the driver slammed the brakes and brought the car to a complete stop. The car missed them by some inches, and the little girl screamed and froze in terror. Amuli, seeing how terrified she was, pulled her close to herself to shield her. Horns blared loudly as people looked on with shock. The street fell into complete silence as the driver of the car flung open the door and approached them angrily. "Are you mad?" she asked Amuli, who tried to apologize for peace to reign, but the young woman was not having it. She followed Amuli behind, insisting that she listens to her. "Answer me, you poor woman. Did they send you? Do you want to ruin someone's car? Eh? This is a 75 million naira Benz, and your entire generation put together will not be able to afford it. Instead of looking before you cross the road, you are here gallivanting, looking for someone to hit you so that you can claim money from them." The young woman screamed angrily as Amuli said nothing more to her. People began to gather, and Amuli was not ready for their attention. She left the scene and headed straight to her office, happy that no one recognized her. As she stepped into the lobby of her company's headquarters, her staff dressed in sharp suits and polished heels all stood still as they watched her walk to the private elevator that led to her office. Her assistant Uchi, a tall, graceful woman in her early 30s, was already waiting by the private elevator, a tablet tucked under her arm. Uchi had a quiet elegance about her, the kind that didn't demand attention but commanded respect. A first-class graduate from the University of Ibadan, she had worked her way up from a junior analyst position to become the personal assistant of the most powerful woman in the country, not because of connections, but because of her integrity, precision, and an unwavering loyalty to Madam Amuli. To many of the staff, Uche was an enigma. She spoke rarely, but when she did, people listened. They said she was Amuli's shadow, always by her side, always watching, always listening. What most people did not know was that Uche had lost her parents in a building collapse 10 years ago, a tragedy that had been traced to the negligence of a construction company that Amuli's firm later shut down. Uche never forgot, and neither did Madam Amuli. Since then, their relationship had been more than professional, built on trust, forged in loss, and bound by an unspoken understanding of pain. Uche had found not just a boss, but a purpose. As they stepped into the elevator heading to her office, Uche stood in her usual corner, eyes fixed on her tablet, but her mind always 3 steps ahead. They arrived the office minutes later, and Uche stood still in the corner with her tablet as Amuli stood by the glass wall in her office. The view of the city stretched endlessly as she stood there for a minute, savoring the view as she said a short prayer before heading for her chair. This was a daily ritual for her, a moment of silence to center herself, to thank God for the grace that had brought her from nothing to everything. No matter the chaos outside, no matter the gossip around her, or the venom that they spat on the streets, Amuli began each day with gratitude. Uche, still holding her tablet in her hand, cleared her throat softly and informed her that Chief Obiora had arrived. Chief Obiora was the managing director of Beso Construction, a company who had been vying for a contract in her company for so many years. Amuli had always been cautious about granting his company the contract. She admired his business acumen, but rumors of his loose ethics had made her skeptical about giving him the contract. Still, today, she had agreed to see him, mostly out of courtesy and curiosity. "Let him in," she said to her assistant Uche, who went out to let him in. A few moments later, a young beautiful woman walked into the office all smiles as she froze on seeing her. It was the same woman who insulted Amuli a few moments ago down the road. She was Chief Obiora's only daughter. Chief had an emergency to attend to a few minutes ago, so he called his daughter to represent him in the meeting, which he promised to join in a few minutes. His daughter Kimberly was on her way to meet her father at Anwuli's company when she almost ran into Anwuli by the roadside. She never knew that the woman she so insulted was the same woman that her father was hoping and praying to see. Kimberly had heard so much about Anwuli. She knew how much her own father looked up to her and even prayed to be given the contract that they applied for. Now, here she stood before Anwuli, her confidence faltering as she began to plead for forgiveness. Anwuli sat still behind her desk, her expression unreadable. She said nothing for several long seconds, letting Kimberly's discomfort fill the room like a smoke. Kimberly took a shaky step forward, her voice low and trembling. Madam Anwuli, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you. Please forgive me for what I said earlier. I wasn't thinking. Anwuli slowly rose from her chair and walked towards her, her face calm as she looked directly into Kimberly's eyes. You didn't need to know it was me, she said quietly. You just needed to treat a fellow human being with respect. Kimberly's eyes filled with tears. Please, I was just angry. I didn't mean to, she said to Anwuli, who shook her head in disappointment as she began to speak. Didn't mean to call me a poor woman? Didn't mean to mock a stranger in public or to judge someone by the dust on their feet and the simplicity of their clothes. Kimberly dropped her gaze in shame as her father walked into the office smiling, apologizing to Anwuli for his brief absence. Madam Anwuli, I deeply apologize for not being here earlier. I trust my daughter is already walking you through our proposal, he said to Anwuli, whose face was stern as she walked to her chair. Chief Obiora could feel that something was wrong. He glanced at his daughter as he tried to decipher what could have happened, but Kimberly remained mute, her eyes now red from crying. Chief Obiora turned to Anwuli, who informed him that his company's proposal had been denied. Chief Obiora blinked in confusion, wondering what could have gone wrong. Anwuli, sensing the confusion in the room, informed him that her decision was hinged on the actions of his daughter. You entrusted your legacy into the hands of someone who lacks discipline, empathy and wisdom, Anwuli said evenly. That speaks volumes about your business judgment, and my company cannot take such risk. Chief Obiora stood there confused as he watched his own daughter in disbelief. He didn't say a word as he walked out of the office furious. His daughter, Kimberly, trailed after him, knowing that she was in so much trouble. They arrived home a few minutes later, and Chief Obiora walked into the living room as his daughter, Kimberly, went down on her knees and began to beg. She narrated all that happened to her father, who stood there furious to hear how she treated Anwuli. You did what? To who? Chief Obiora roared angrily as Kimberly began to cry. I didn't know, father. I didn't recognize her, she said to her father, who rebuked her for saying such a thing. I raised you better than this, Kimberly. Do you know how long I've worked to get her attention? Do you know what this contract means for our company? He asked Kimberly, who burst out in tears, realizing the terrible things that she had done. Her father stripped her of all her privileges, her car, her credit cards, her personal assistant and even her luxury apartment. From today, you will take public transport to wherever you are going. Maybe then you will learn humility, he said to Kimberly, who could not believe her ears. She had never used public transport in her life and was not about to do so now. She pleaded with her father, who told her that the only way that she could get her life back was if she secured the contract for Madam Anwuli, and Kimberly froze on hearing this. She had no idea how she would make this work, seeing how angry Anwuli was at her. So she sat there for hours thinking, as she made up her mind to try. The next morning, dressed in the most modest clothes she had, Kimberly boarded a crowded bus for the first time in her life. She sat quietly, squashed between a snoring man and a fish seller who had a basket of crayfish by her chair. Her designer perfume had long faded, and her manicured nails were now chipped. Kimberly had no driver to drop her off at her destination, no tinted window to shield her from the sun. She could not believe how people survive this kind of life and still remain happy and content. The bus stopped at a junction not too far from Anwuli's company, so Kimberly got down and began to walk. She walked for a few minutes and arrived the company, her heart racing as she approached the receptionist, who smiled and asked who she came to see. Madam Anwuli, she said to the receptionist, who told her to have a seat. It was only 7 in the morning, and Madam Anwuli was not yet on seat. Kimberly waited as she rehearsed what she was going to say to her when she arrived. A few minutes later, Kimberly decided to go use the restroom in the corner. She walked into the restroom and met a young, beautiful woman who scolded her and handed her a mop. "How dare you come late, you useless cleaner," she said to Kimberly, who she warned not to leave the toilet until it was squeaky clean. Kimberly had never been this humiliated in her life. She knew better than to make a scene, not at the company, after all the damage that she had already caused in the last 24 hours. So, she calmly apologized to the woman and began to mop the floor of the toilet. Kimberly had never mopped floors in her life. She never knew how tedious it was to push a wet mop across the tiled floor without leaving streaks. Her back ached terribly as the sweat on her face dropped like raindrops from the sky. But Kimberly said nothing. She scrubbed the floor diligently as the woman who insulted her stood by the mirror retouching her lip gloss, completely unaware of who Kimberly truly was. "Make sure you wipe under the sink too," the woman barked as she walked out of the toilet, leaving Kimberly alone with her mop. A few minutes later, she was done and returned to the lobby, where she was told that Madam Anwuli was now in a meeting. "You can go and come back later," the receptionist suggested, but Kimberly decided to wait. She sat there exhausted as the young woman who insulted her in the restroom walked out of her office to meet her sitting at the reception. "Who told you to sit?" she said to Kimberly angrily as she handed her a mop to go clean the CEO's office. Kimberly trembled at the thought of it. She was now going to Anwuli's office, not as the daughter of Chief Obiora, but as a cleaner with her mop in hand. Her entire body shook as she picked up the mop and began to walk. She carried the mop towards Madam Anwuli's office like a silent soldier who was on a battlefield of lessons. She arrived at Anwuli's office and luckily, Anwuli was not on seat. Kimberly began to mop the floor, wondering what she would say if Anwuli walked into her office and found her there. As Kimberly dragged the mop across the polished marble floor, her mind raced. Every drop of sweat felt like a drop of shame, but also, strangely, a drop of healing. She cleaned the glass windows, wiped the base of the chairs, and even knelt to polish under the desk. Every stroke, a silent apology to Anwuli. She had no idea if this act would earn her a second chance, but deep down, she knew it was the right thing to do. Suddenly, the door creaked open and Kimberly froze, still on her knees clutching the mop. She slowly looked up and in front of her stood Madam Anwuli, dressed in her usual simple dress. Her calm presence filled the room before she even said a word. Her eyes met that of Kimberly and for a long moment, silence hung between them like smoke in the air. "What are you doing in my office?" Anwuli asked quietly as Kimberly opened her mouth but no words came out. She bowed her head and began to speak. "I came to apologize again, ma, but the lady downstairs met me in the toilet and thought I was a cleaner. She made me clean the toilet and asked me to come clean your office. After everything I've done, I didn't think I deserved to correct her." Anwuli took a step into the office. She closed the door gently behind her and walked to her desk. "You didn't think you deserved to correct her?" Anwuli asked Kimberly, who bowed her head in shame as she began to cry. "You've learned something most people in power never do," Anwuli said. "Humility, the kind that doesn't come from being taught, but from being broken." Kimberly's eyes were now filled with tears as she began to apologize. "I'm so sorry for everything, ma. I truly am." Anwuli gave her a small nod and replied, "I believe you," she said to Kimberly, who looked up at her shocked. "You do?" "Yes," Anwuli said, "because you could have left that restroom. You could have shouted at the receptionist. You could have walked out of this company in anger and pride. But you didn't. Instead, you stayed and even obeyed without any objection. You remind me of myself so many years ago," Anwuli said to Kimberly, who opened her mouth in shock as she continued to listen. "I was once like you, pompous, proud and extremely arrogant. I spoke rashly to those beneath me and played down on their suffering. As a young woman born into money, I never knew what true suffering meant. To me, when I didn't get the exact amount of money I wanted, I felt I was suffering. Suffering to me was when I failed to meet my goals. It was my lack, despite being in the midst of plenty. However, this perception changed when something life-changing happened to me. It was a calm and wet afternoon, and I had just bought a new car, the most expensive model at the time. I was so proud of it and couldn't wait to show it off to the world. That afternoon, I sent my driver home and insisted on picking my daughter from school myself. Her name was Chizaram, and she was my only child, my miracle in human form. Amuli's voice cracked slightly as she turned away from Kimberly for a moment. She stared out of the window, blinking back the tears that had clearly been buried for years. She was 7, sweet, curious, and full of life. She always asked me why I worked so much and why I never walked her to school like the other parents. I laughed and told her that the parents that walked wished to be like us. They can't afford our car. That's why they are walking, I said to my daughter. But Chizaram insisted that she wanted us to walk. Filled with so much rage, I forced her into the car and began to drive, ignoring the fact that she fought me away, screaming that she wanted to walk. I could not understand why my daughter would prefer to walk to school, despite knowing that we had a brand new car. So I drove, ignoring her cries and protests at the back of the car. A few minutes later, we arrived at a busy junction, and just as I was about turning into the road ahead, a huge truck ran into my car and killed my daughter on the spot. I survived the accident, but the guilt stuck to me for all these years. If only I listened to my daughter and walked, she might be alive today. So I never used the car again and decided to walk for the rest of my life to make my daughter happy. Amuli's voice broke completely, her shoulders trembling as she stood before the tall glass window. I walked because that's what she wanted. Just one simple thing. One walk. One moment of bonding. Of being human. Not wealthy. And I chose pride instead. Kimberly was weeping silently now, her face wet with tears. The mop lay forgotten beside her. I used to think that walking was beneath me, that the world should clear the road when I passed. Amuli continued, her voice hoarse. But now, I walk in her memory. Every step I take is a step I should have taken with her. Every mile beneath my feet is a silent apology to my daughter. She turned back to Kimberly, and for the first time, the powerful billionaire didn't look like an untouchable figure. She looked like a mother, broken, grieving, and forever changed. She died in my arms, Anwuli whispered, her voice trembling. She was still wearing her seatbelt. Her lips had stopped moving. Her body was limp, and all I could do was scream her name into a silence that never answered. Kimberly's entire body shook with sobs as she dropped her head into her hands. I walk not because I am cursed, Anwuli said, walking towards her, but because I am carrying a promise. I made a vow that I would never let my pride cost me someone's life again, that I would never forget how a single act of arrogance took away everything that ever mattered to me. She placed a hand on Kimberly's shoulder. And now, you two have a chance to choose. Will you live to impress or to impact? Kimberly nodded slowly, still crying, but something had shifted in her. She had walked into Anwuli's building, trying to fix a mistake, but she was living with something deeper, a lesson etched in pain, humility, and love. And Madame Anwuli, the billionaire who never used the car, walked out of her office once more, her steps slow, silent, and sacred, as though a little pair of invisible feet were walking beside her. Kimberly no longer cared about her father's wealth. She decided to build a life for herself, a life rooted not in entitlement, but in empathy. She sat quietly on the couch outside Anwuli's office, still stunned from everything that had just happened. Her eyes were puffy, her hands clenched. She hadn't even noticed Uchi, Madame Anwuli's assistant, walking until she felt the gentle weight of her hand on her shoulder. Go home, Uche said softly. You've done enough for today. Kimberly looked up. I'm sorry if I caused trouble. You didn't cause trouble, Uche replied, her voice calm but firm. You exposed it. Uche turned and walked to the receptionist's desk, where Chidima, the senior staff member who had ordered Kimberly to clean the toilet and mop the CEO's office, was now busy scrolling on her phone. Chidima, Uche called, her tone like steel wrapped in velvet. Come with me, Uche said, already walking towards the HR office. Chidima smirked, half joking as she asked, Is it about that cleaner girl earlier? She asked, but Uche ignored her question. So Chidima quickly followed her down the hallway, trying to regain composure. Inside the HR office, Uche shut the door behind them. The room fell into a heavy silence. Do you know who you humiliated this morning? Uche asked, folding her arms. She didn't say who she was. I assume she was the cleaner. That she was beneath you? Uche cut in. Because she didn't look expensive enough to deserve respect? I didn't mean to, ma. You did, Uche replied, her voice level. And worse, you acted on it. You backed that her in a company that was built on dignity, humility, and grace. You made her mop toilets because of how she looked. Chidima's face was now red. But she wasn't a staff. How was I to know? It doesn't matter who she was, Uche said, stepping forward. It matters who you are. And today, you showed that you don't belong in this company. Chidima gasped. Ma, are you firing me? No, Uche said coldly. I'm releasing you from a position you never respected. She placed an envelope on the table. Your letter. HR has been informed. Kindly pack your belongings and leave. Chidima blinked, stunned. But this isn't fair. Firing me because of one mistake. One mistake rooted in arrogance, Uche said, turning to leave. And this company has no space for this kind of legacy. As she opened the door, she paused and said, next time you meet someone in plain clothes, remember, it's not the fabric on their back that defines them. It's the weight of their story, she said as Chidima packed up her things and left. Weeks later, Kimberly joined the internship program at Madame Anwuli's company. No special treatment, no family name to fall back on. She started from the ground, just like everyone else, filing documents, running errands, sitting in overcrowded buses, eating roadside food, and listening more than she spoke. For the first time in her life, she understood the value of people beyond what they owned. She worked diligently, with sincerity, and slowly earned her respect and position in the company. Not as Chief Obiora's daughter, but as Kimberly, the hard worker who through sweat and tears became the chief operating officer of the company. Even her father was so proud of her, and Kimberly had Anwuli to thank for her success. Anwuli, however, continued to work, ignoring what anyone said, as true success was not measured in the number of cars a person drove, but by the number of lives they touched. The lesson to be learned from this story is that true wealth is not found in material possessions or outward appearances, but in character, compassion, and humility. It teaches us that respect should never be reserved for status, but given freely to all, regardless of what they wear or where they stand. Through Anwuli's quiet strength and Kimberly's transformation, we learn that pain can lead to purpose, and that the most powerful impact we can make is not in how we rise above others, but in how we choose to walk beside them. I hope you enjoyed the story.